All right, so today we're going to talk about, um, I guess, concepts behind finishing the heel hook. This is not really a technique video, it's just sort of concepts. It's going to be a lot of talking. And I'll talk about the outside heel hook because it's easier for me to talk about. So I think that conventionally, or at least I think a lot of people think of the heel hook as purely a twisting submission, right? So you're like, we have someone's leg, and we start turning it and turning it and turning it up until a certain point where it's not supposed to turn anymore, and then you get some kind of break or stretch or some kind of damage done to the leg. Okay, so like obviously that's true. Like the heel hook is a twisting submission. So like if we look at the joints in the leg, the knee doesn't really rotate at all, right? It can flex, it can extend, but it's really not supposed to rotate at all. Like this joint right here doesn't do this that much. But the issue with that is that, so his ankle does rotate a little bit, but his hip actually has a lot of range of motion as far as, both internal rotation, so just turn your hip in, right? And external rotation, right? So we can turn this a lot. Um, and the thing about heel hooks is like people used to say like, oh, they're so scary because the submission comes on immediately. But if we purely think of it as a twisting submission, like that can't possibly be true because we have to take the leg to the end of its range of motion, right? I have to rotate everything. I have to take all the slack out of it, which includes the rotation of his knee, just barely anything, the rotation of his ankle, which is a little bit, and then the rotation of his hip, which is actually quite a lot. So I have to go through all of that range of motion before his leg starts moving in a way, I guess, that it's just not supposed to move. So what I would say is that you're gonna get more finishes, and the heel hook is going to truly be scary when you start thinking of it as both a twisting submission and just a regular like lateral submission, right? So Lachlan Giles calls this like a sideways knee bar, right? So like I said, his knee, it flexes, it extends, it doesn't really rotate that much, and it for sure does not adduct, and it does not abduct at all. And so if we start applying lateral pressure into the knee in this direction, the submission should come on immediately because his knee doesn't bend that way at all. It's already at the end of its range of motion, right? So if I start to apply like a sideways knee bar, right? Lateral pressure to his knee to try to get his knee to bend like this, what happens? His leg will rotate externally, right? If I don't control anything else. I hip through, his leg starts to externally rotate, right? And so that's where we pair it with the rotation. So all I have to make sure is that his leg is not able to externally rotate at all. If I can just keep it still and hip through, I should immediately be able to get that bend in the knee, in addition to the twisting submission, right? So I just take my heel hook grip, right? As long as I have this grip, his leg is unable to externally rotate. So now when I hip through, there's immediately pressure on this ligament right here, his LCL, right? So I not only twist, but I hip through, and that submission should come on immediately, okay? And so I feel like we should, or at least more of us should start thinking of the heel hook as not just as twisting submission, but also like that sideways knee bar. And knowing that sort of also informs us about the types of leg entanglements we want to use to finish heel hooks. So for example, like if I want to apply force in this direction, I need to orient my hips in that direction, right? So if I'm trying to finish this outside heel hook, I want to be an outside ashi, right? This is why we see that this position is a higher percentage finishing position for the outside heel hook because my hips are oriented in the direction that I need them to be to get this lateral pressure on his knee, right? But I guess that like outside ashi can be a difficult sort of leg entanglement to play, or even if we just think of it as a guard, it's a very difficult guard to play, right? Because I don't really have frames on him. It's very difficult to, do anything but finish a heel hook from here. It's hard for me to sweep him. It's hard for me to get to other positions. It's very easy for him, or it's easier for him to start to get into a leg drag, to start to pass my guard, to take my back and things like that. So this position is like really good for finishing. It's also not great for exposing the heel, right? So if he's like properly hiding his heel right here, right? I'm gonna have to roll through and do all sorts of things like that to expose the heel. That's why you see a lot of outside heel hooks initiated from this position, straight ashy, right? Because all I have to do to expose the heel is reap. I reap, that exposes the heel, and now I can just grab it, right? But again, this is not as good of a finishing position for the outside heel hook, because look at the way my hips are oriented. My hips are oriented completely in the other direction, right? And so you see heel hooks finished here, but I feel like you can eat a lot of that heel hook, especially like at the highest level. So eventually we want to get to the outside heel hook after we've exposed the heel to finish this outside heel hook. Did I say outside ashy? What I meant was outside ashy. Yeah. So often, you'll see this sequence. And again, like this is not a technique video, but I just want to comment on like understanding the submission should inform us about what leg entanglements we choose to use, right? So I use straight ashy to expose the heel, right? And then usually we'll roll through, and as we roll through, I hold on to the heel hook the entire time, and I end up in outside ashy, which is my finishing position, right? So, I just want to say all that just to say that, like, conceptually understanding what a submission is makes it much more easy for us to finish the submission. So there's not a bunch of, like, conditions that we have to memorize for success, right? So like an armbar is a very good example of this. Like it's simply just elbow hyperextension. Like as long as you understand that you're hyperextending the elbow, you don't have to memorize all these conditions for success. Obviously so lay down on your back. Obviously, if his elbow slips inside my hip, I'm not going to be able to hyperextend his elbow. But that's not something I have to memorize. I should just implicitly understand that because I know I'm trying to hyperextend his elbow. So the point I'm trying to make with the heel hook is that, like, if you understand what you're doing to his knee, like, you don't have to memorize all these conditions for success. Like, you can just implicitly, apply your technique. So yeah, hopefully that made some sense and I wasn't just rambling. But yeah, that's sort of concepts for the finishing mechanics of a heel hook.